everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of the Chicana Therapist Podcast. I am the Chicana Therapist, the person behind the Chicana Therapist blog. I'm Dr. Xochilt Alamillo. My pronouns are she, her, ella. And this episode is just to kind of introduce myself, tell you a little bit more about my background and my qualifications and why I decided to start this podcast, why I decided to start the blog in the first place, and just tell you a little bit more about what to expect. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I have a PhD in social work. So that means that I'm very into social justice. So everything that I do is through that lens and that perspective. And if you aren't aware, that's kind of what makes an LCSW different than other types of therapists. Not that they don't have that lens, but we are specifically trained with that in mind. I have my own private practice. It's called Vida Counseling, where I see individual Latinas, mostly Latina adults, some youth. I don't take any new clients now, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but I do still have that practice. And through that practice, I also offer trainings, I offer workshops, I do mini retreats here locally in Colorado, and I'm going more into the international retreat. So we are having our first retreat in Oaxaca between a colleague of mine and myself. We're offering that for Latinas. So I do a little bit of everything. I'm also currently in the process of starting a nonprofit with my daughter. And in the future, as that kind of fleshes out more, I'm happy to tell you more about that. So the Chicana Therapist was born as a blog, as a brand, after I wanted to find ways to kind of give my opinion, my professional opinion around things that had to do with mental health, specifically around the Latinx community. I wanted to be able to talk about things through that cultural lens, right? Because I feel like there's just not enough representation out there when it comes to Latinx, Latine mental health. And so I wanted to kind of provide that. It's also something that I was hoping that people could use as a resource. And then I started to think, I've always kind of wanted to have a podcast because I'm a yapper, I guess. I have a lot to say about things. And that just took a little bit longer to put out. And I have had a few people say, that they would be interested in listening to a podcast. So I thought, why not, represent in that sense? So this podcast is meant for really anyone who is interested in Latinx mental health and wellness. But specifically, I'm a Chicana. That means I'm from Mexican descent. My parents are Mexican immigrants. My dad's from Michoacan. My mom's from Jalisco. I was born here, but I'm first gen. And so I wanted to be clear that it's coming from that perspective. Even though all Latinx and Latina people are welcome to listen and hopefully find this as a resource and as something relatable, I just want to be clear that that's why it's called the Chicana Therapist, because that's my background and that's my perspective. So a little bit about myself. I was born in Compton, California during the 80s. I'm about to be 46 next month. And I grew up in the hood. I don't know how else to say it. Although I didn't know I lived in the hood, right? We just all lived there. So we didn't all know that it was different than anyone else's experience. And we moved to Colorado. My dad, after he became documented, he moved us to Colorado, and it was a big culture shock. And so I started to struggle a lot around my identity, feeling like I belonged. I went from being an excellent student to being a real slacker, especially in high school. And looking back, I think it's important to note that because that's when I started to become interested in that feeling of belonging, the importance of identity, the importance of culture. And so that informs a lot of what I do now, that experience that I had of like suddenly realizing that I was brown amongst mostly white folks. I don't care what anybody says. In the 80s, I don't remember anyone in my neighborhood being white. Not neighbors, not classmates, not teachers, no one in my neighborhood. And then coming here, there was only a handful of Latinx people in school. So it was a real culture shock. And I got married very young. I was 20 years old. My husband was 21 and had kids fairly early. I followed this whole, thing that was imposed on me of like, you're a woman, and so your job is just to get married, have kids, and that's kind of your life. And so I followed that coming from a religious household. And into my 20s, after having my 3 kids all in my 20s, I I was like, something, this can't be it. It just wasn't for me. Shout out to all the housewives and moms and stay-at-home moms. I just it wasn't for me. And so I decided to go back to school. I'm a community college graduate. I did it all online the first 2 years when my kids were real little. And then I was able to keep going. I was like, oh, that wasn't too hard, So I started to go transfer to Metro State University here in Denver. And I'll never forget that they asked me what I'd like to major in, and I didn't know what that was. I wasn't a type of student in high school that was ever talked to about college or anything like that. And my parents never encouraged college. They didn't discourage it, but they never encouraged it. My parents, I think my dad got to like a 6th grade education, my mom similarly. So they were just happy I graduated high school. And so I started that journey, and I started it in human services, and I was fascinated with it. And I had one professor who was Latino who really inspired me, and I was like, I want to be a doctor. And so I remember asking him, I said, how do I do what you have done? How do I become Dr. Alamillo, Dr. Xochilt? And he became a mentor of mine and kind of guided me through the way he happened to have an MSW, a social work degree. And so I followed in that path. I got my MSW and had plans of going back to get my PhD, which I did after 2 years of working in a high school as a counselor. And then fast forward, it took me 5 or 6 years to finish up my PhD because it was a lot through COVID. And throughout that time, I was able to see clients and all of that. And 2 years ago, I got my PhD in social work. My research is around Latinx youth, but specifically my dissertation was on Chicana teens and their experience attempting suicide when they were young in high school age. And so that's kind of where my research goes. I'm really interested in youth wellness, particularly around youth identity, youth sense of belonging. I'm also an educator, so I teach at the graduate level here at the University of Denver. I've also taught at Metro State University in the social work master's level department. I've taught everything from clinical skills to policy classes. I will be teaching grief and loss here the next quarter. I teach CBT. I teach trauma. Trauma is another one of my specialties. So I also do that. I also was late diagnosed with ADHD. I was in grad school when I was diagnosed. And so I do see a lot of adult diagnosed Latinas, and that's also a specialty of mine. I do therapy with some Latinas that are struggling with executive dysfunction and everything that comes along with that. So like I said, one of the goals of this podcast is that it's a resource for the Latinx community, that it is something that people can relate to or can find usefulness in. I also think that I hope that it would be something that helps to fight that stigma around mental health that is very prevalent in the Latinx community. I hope that people see it as just more information on why we shouldn't judge folks who have mental health struggles, including ourselves. And so that's another hope that I have. Let's see what else would be useful to know about me. So as I told you, I got married really young. I've been married for 25 years to Braulio, my husband, who we met in high school. We have 3 children. My kids are 24, 20, and 19. So they're still living at home, of course, because we're Mexican. And also, this is a terrible economy for them to be moving out. My oldest daughter has an MSW as well, so we're kind of a social work duo. And my son is a farrier apprentice, so he does like the horseshoe stuff. He's really grew up around horses and things like that. So he's working on that. And then my youngest is in community college and she wants to be an educator. So I'm very proud of them. And they're a big part of why I do what I do. And I have a lot to say around parenting. So I hope that it helps to know that I've been through all those stages. Not all of them, because they still go through it and you don't stop being a parent, right? Other things about me, I liked plants. I like houseplants. I like to garden. Garden season is starting, and so I've already got some seeds sown. I like Snow the product. One of my goals is that I will be able to interview Snow on this podcast one day. What you expect from this podcast, I'm going to have a topic that I'm going to hit on in every episode. I will eventually have some guests on to talk on certain topics, but what I would love from you is to hear any specific topics you'd like me to hit on, anything that has to do with mental health, with wellness, with the Latinx community, with higher ed even, because I'd love to bring up topics that people are asking for. So please feel free to email me at Xochilt@thechicanatherapist.com. Any and all feedback is welcome. What would you like to see? What would you like to explore? Yeah, so I would love to hear all of that. And then hopefully you'll have a few more episodes to listen to coming up. And yeah, I'm very excited. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for listening. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. Nothing shared in this podcast constitutes therapy, clinical advice, or a therapeutic relationship. Listening to this podcast does not establish a provider-client relationship. If you are experiencing a mental health crisis or are in need of clinical support, please contact a licensed mental health professional or call or text 988, the crisis hotline.